I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. I know it's weird to hear my voice, but as many of you know, I think most of you know at this point, Alice had her baby, so she is off recovering, and I think also she had posted on Patreon, and we've talked about this some in the gallery. He initially was in the NICU. He's still in the hospital, still getting stronger, but he is heading in the right direction, and they hope they'll be able to bring him home soon. But fortunately, you don't just have to sit and listen to me, because we are very lucky to have the amazing hosts of the Murder Sheet, Anya and Kevin, join us today. Hello, guys. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having us. Best wishes to Alice, and you're doing a lot better job than I would be doing if I had to do it without Anya.
Aww.
All the love. And I just want to say from the very beginning, thank you guys for everything you've done to bring this trial to all of us. You know, this is a case so many of us have been following for so long, and yet we haven't been able to follow it in real time, either through, you know, I mean, watching it on television would have been one thing, but it's difficult to even get press reports out because of how access has been managed. So thank you guys for standing in line and fighting off people trying to steal the list of people in line and everything else. You guys are troopers.
Thank you so much.
Really,
I know you guys are writing a book on the case, but it seems like you could write a book just on this sort of bizarre week, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, I guess now, that you've spent in Delphi.
I feel like we could too. The whole thing sometimes just feels like a surreal movie sometimes.
Well, I definitely want to, those of you who don't know, we're in the middle of jury deliberations. I want to get your guys' thoughts on that. But we've also been going through this trial sort of week by week, best we can. Obviously, we can't see it, as I was saying, but read about it in the news reports and then following it with you guys. And I'd like to get your thoughts on the last week of testimony as well, and get everybody who's listening caught up on really, I think, the defense case primarily. There's some rebuttal we'll talk about as well. When we left off, the defense had put on 2 witnesses. Don't really understand exactly what those witnesses had to offer. I'd be interested if you guys have some thoughts on the choices the defense has made on some of its witnesses. You know, I've been thinking about this a lot. There's a lot of different ways you could do this. And I think the most charitable way to explain it is they've had a lot of experts who are probably really important, and they've sort of mixed in people. Well, shoot, look at that. Just can't stay away.
I can't stay away. Not when we have, I keep trying to delete myself. Not when we have the best guests on.
Oh
my God. How are you doing?
I'm great. How are you guys doing? Thank you for taking your, 2 seconds of unfrozen outside waiting time, fighting people to get into the courtroom to be with us.
Oh my God.
I feel like honored right now.
I'm a mess right now. I got home from the hospital like 12 hours ago, and Brittany might bust in here because she's very mad that I left her for a week. But it's not about me. It's about you guys. Thank you for being here with us.
Like, I don't even know what to say. Like, congratulations, and just like take care of yourself, Alice.
Yeah.
I am. You guys kept me very, very well accompanied in the hospital. I had all the nurses listening to Murder Sheet by the end.
Oh my gosh, that
Thank
is
you so
nice. Okay.
Not a joke.
We're just some jokers standing out in the dark right now. Like, seriously, like like.
Are you you're really outside right now?
Oh no, we're not. No.
Oh, okay.
Just metaphorically.
This is like when Stone Cold's music plays in the middle of a wrestling match.
That's right.
That's
right. No, well, I'll give you guys all the updates later, but we need to like preserve y'all's like energy and have your knowledge be spilled out into all of the radio waves, and then we can talk about me.
Well, Alice, I was just saying, and since you're here now, you can offer your expertise as well.
Yeah.
The defense, we're talking about the defense's case and how it seems like they have these experts who are relevant, but then they're calling these other sort of random people who don't really seem to offer much.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know if that was a strategy to sort of give the jury a break between, lots of information you're getting from an expert, and then we're going to talk to somebody who was taking pictures of the bridge that day or what. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I don't know. I mean, it's a fool's errand to try and figure out what their strategy is. I think part of it is we've talked about this before where the defense doesn't want it to seem like, oh, the prosecution has put on 45 witnesses and we've only put on 3. Even if those 3 are like the experts to rebut everything that could be the prosecution's case, there are some people who just think about things purely in metrics. And so they may be thinking we need to fill up our roles. Number 2 is I can imagine that they want to confuse the timeline. The timeline is really tight and it's really bad for Bridge Guy. And it's really bad for Richard Allen because of Richard Allen's own words and because of all the people who see Bridge Guy. And really, there should be no doubt whatsoever that Bridge Guy is Richard Allen. So whether you're saying it's Richard Allen or Bridge Guy, timeline sucks for both of those guys, who I think are the same guys. And so by just introducing noise into the equation, you are banking on the 1 or 2 people who are like squirrel, 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 and think, well, what about the 3:30 person? Because remember, we don't think linearly as people. We just hear lots of noise and we're thinking, well, someone took a picture. What time did they take a picture? I don't know, but they didn't see Bridge Guy. And so if you introduce noise, you're introducing error, right? This is why in like math equations, why in science experiments, you reduce the noise, because you can always introduce noise. It's always going to throw something off. And that's what I think they're doing. I don't think it's necessarily wasting time. It's a tactic. I hope people are paying attention and seeing how it is pure noise and does nothing to the core timeline that is set forth by the prosecution.
Yeah, I think, Alice, I think you're spot on there. Honestly, it feels all very distraction-esque at this point with some of these timeline witnesses because time and time again, they get up there and say, well, I don't really know when I got there. And then, it would come out that they would have said in 2017 that they got there a lot later than what the defense is saying now. And it would kind of render everything irrelevant. But I think as far as, I don't know, I thought what they were going to, I thought in this case that they had sort of an alternate theory where the girls were abducted in a car. And therefore, it was almost like matching the prosecution's theory because, like, either way, they're gone by 2:32. But what these witnesses kind of revealed was like that whole theory was a little bit less important to this defense team than we might have initially thought.
And I think, we joked about the Odinist theory and how silly it was, but it seems like that really was what they were going to go with. And once that was gone, they sort of had this maybe the girls were taken away theory, but it never really materialized. Now, one thing you guys mentioned that I was surprised, just say, look, it was Bridge Guy who did it, but it wasn't our Bridge Guy. There was somebody else on the trails just because these talk about like his height difference or whatever. I mean, I don't know. I think that would have been a much better approach. They went after the muddy bloody witness so hard, and she has no reason to lie. She has no reason to be making anything up. It's just hard to convince people, I think, that this random woman who wanted nothing to do with this case is nevertheless manufactured all of these details that hurt Richard Allen. Of course, they only hurt Richard Allen if he is Bridge Guy. Like if that's just Bridge Guy walking down the street, it doesn't hurt him at all. And
Yeah,
so
and she could have been their best friend because she depicts a man so covered in blood. You could say if he did, in fact, if Bridge Guy had so much blood on him, you would expect to find that in his car even all these years later. And there was no blood found in Richard Allen's car. So you could make that argument. She's telling the truth, and that proves that Bridge Guy is not Richard Allen.
Yeah, I think maybe it's really hard. Again, having been through trials and knowing how exhausting and how much work goes into it, you have to give grace to all sides. But I think the singular focus on the Odinism angle may have deprived the defense of some of the very obvious attacks that, at least in the coverage, I mean, Brett and I were not in the courtroom, but it seems like there were a lot of questions left on the table. And when you go for a typical defense is just going for reasonable doubt. They didn't seem to ask a lot of the questions that could just poke holes into, again, a really tight timeline. Tight timeline is both good and bad, right? If it's bad for you, you turn it around for you. Tight timeline, well, he had to get right back in that car and get out of there, get out of Dodge. He didn't have time to hose himself down at the CPS building before getting in his car. Where's the blood? You can always see blood. We know this years after the fact. In fact, you have X, Y, and Z. Test all the things that he has. You have all these things years later that you've collected. He didn't destroy any evidence. In fact, you say that he kept evidence. You say he had a keepsake box. If he kept everything, then where's all the things that link him to the crime? And I felt like those things were just not pointed out by the defense because they had been focused on something that was more than a Hail Mary. It was not a Hail Mary anymore by trial because it had been excluded. Odinism was not going to be allowed. And even though they argued for it to come back, there was nothing that changed that linked Odinism to the case that would have changed Judge Gull's ruling, nor should it have. And so I felt like what you have to do when you go to trial is you almost have to turn off your brain from the pre-trial investigative phase and become a sole, like, game time attorney. You have to almost clear your brain of everything you know about the case and listen to every word coming out of every witness's mouth and attack like a sniper everything they say. And things can develop during trial if you are sharp enough to listen and, like, hound on those types of details. But I felt like they were still operating from the outline they created when it was going to be Odinism and didn't listen to what was on the stand to properly attack. Now, I don't think those attacks would have done anything because, again, I think the prosecution's case was very strong. But do know that those are two different tactics you have to have. Pre-trial, and then you put on, like, your game day hat, right? The person who goes on the field to play the football game that day is different than who trains. You have to be able to switch that on to become the sniper attorney.
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say that's really well said. And I didn't see much sniping at this trial.
And I certainly felt as if they seemed to believe they could still get Odinism in because they kept on trying to get it in. And it was like a guy chasing after a girlfriend who's already rejected him a lot of times. They just didn't get the message. Odinism is not going to happen. Move on.
So one of their things that came out in their witnesses, there was sort of an effort at jury nullification to a certain extent, talking about Alan's treatment in prison. And part of that was to undermine the confessions. Get that. But I think in their closing argument, towards the end of their closing argument, when they're talking about the rack and thumb screws and the snake of the state and all this other stuff, I mean, that was very much sort of a look how horribly this man has been treated. Even if he did it, you should punish the state for what they did by acquitting him. And that one of the witnesses who I think was important for that is this Dr. Polly Westcott, who was the forensic psychologist. And she, am I correct that she was she was brought in to look at him, right? Like she spent about 7 hours with him, did an interview, did testing. And that's very typical for those of you who don't know. Like these experts don't spend a ton of time with the defendants that they examine. And that's often an area where we attack them. We'll say, so you spent 7 hours with this man and now you know everything about him. And you know that he's psychotic and you know that he's closed off and he's so fragile. I mean, she basically presented him as almost a child who, if it weren't for his wife, he wouldn't even be able to get through a day. Is that pretty accurate?
Yeah, she presented him as basically the most pathetic man who ever lived, like who cannot do anything without his wife or mother propping him up, who, will have success at work and inevitably self-sabotage to the point where and frankly, it was very interesting. I found it a bit confusing that he seemed as aggressive as he did in his interview with Steve Mullen and Tony Liggett when he first came on the radar, because he seemed, he certainly in that interview, in fairness, was saying, well, I need to check with my wife. But he sounded a lot more brash. He swore, he used bad words. He, kind of got pissed off at the end, I guess. I don't know. It just seemed weird. But she very important to that. And she that was actually an area where deputy prosecutor Stacey Diener did kind of attack her a bit, of kind of noting, like, almost questioning, like, did you even get all of the reports? Did you see this or that? And that was I thought Dr. Westcott did a good job on the stand for the most part, but that was one area where I think Diener got some points for kind of noting, like, hey, you don't even reference this or that, like, kind of making her look like she didn't have the full story.
And look, it's twofold what they were trying to get the expert to say. You have him be this like completely inane, unable to function kind of person who's totally dependent on his mom and wife. He couldn't possibly be the man who says, "Girls down the hill." Right? That was a man with confidence, because it is an incredibly bold crime to go after not one but two victims on a rickety bridge that a lot of people have trouble crossing in the first place. Add a kidnapping murder element to that is a brash thing to do. So though they didn't say that explicitly, they're trying to do twofold here, saying that he can't be the person on that video who did this horrendous crime, nor is he who he's presenting. But you're exactly right. The problem here is we do get to see Richard Allen's own words so many times, and it doesn't comport with what they're painting. Here's the thing. People are multifaceted. You can be someone with immense dependency issues, immense mental issues, and not present that way 24/7. And all you need is that 25 minutes that this like abduction and murder happened to be the worst version of yourself, which it seems like he did here. And one really quick thing that if you guys have already talked about, I'm sorry, but this is, really frustrating, because Brett's exactly right. The defense is just going for jury nullification. If you think they're going for innocence, you're wrong. That's actually not what they're arguing. They're not going to explicitly say that, but they haven't attacked the evidence against Richard Allen. They've attacked the confessions. Here's the thing. The confessions loops in so many things in this case. It's not just the 60 phone calls. It's not just the Dr. Walla confession. It is also when he goes up to the resource officer and puts himself on the bridge and essentially says, "I am the person who is there." That's a confession as well. But they're being looped in here, and people are like, well, other than the confessions, what do we have here? We have so many things that are outside of when he's in jail, when he's supposedly mistreated, when he's supposedly in isolation. Take out all those. You don't need those. The reason they really help is it tells an entire story. But don't be swept into this whole, all the confessions, all of his words are confessions. No, no, no. There is a timeline, and they're arguing something very specific, that he loses his mind when he's being mistreated by the state, and no matter how horrific his crimes are, jury nullify, because big bad government, X, Y, and Z. Guess what? If you think solitary confinement or the way we treat, pretrial detainees is bad, fantastic. Go to legislation. It doesn't change his own words, which are not swept up in that theory of false confessions, and putting him on the bridge there. And he is just not he's just not a good example of bad treatment, because I don't think he was poorly treated here. This is, I mean, look, it is no walk in the park to be in prison. I don't want to be in prison. I don't want to be in jail. That's why I follow the laws, because I don't want to end up in that position. It's not supposed to be a walk in the park. So be careful when people try to sweep all these confessions into one thing. Be careful, because that's not what the defense is arguing, but they're going along with the mainstream media or whatever that's looping it all together.
Yeah, and I'll add one thing that stood out to me in a big way at this trial, because I agree. I think there's certainly room for conversations about what do we do with people who are accused of something really horrifying to the point where other inmates are going to want to kill or harm them, around kids, or if someone's exhibiting extreme behaviors. But, like, one thing we heard again and again is that regardless of whether or not you're feigning or sincere in your behavior, at some point your body's going to start degrading. Like, you're going to start losing it, and maybe actually dealing with some actual mental health symptoms, because you're not eating, you're not sleeping, you're not taking care of yourself. And so it's like, at a certain point, a lot of this kind of just became like, I don't know, battle of the experts, but also kind of mood. It's like, it seems like two things can be true. It's clear that he had a very hard time in Westville, but is that necessarily because he was being singled out for horrific treatment? No, in fact, it seems like the people at Westville very much tried to accommodate him, maybe even more so than normal, which I think is appropriate given the fact he was pre-trial. But yeah, I mean, none of this really changed what happened on February 13th, 2017. That's what I'm kind of more interested in as someone who cares about the case.
Yeah, and they had this Dr. Gracian, is that his name?
Yeah.
Gracian, who's an expert in solitary confinement. And you see this a lot. There is a push in the United States to basically end solitary confinement because it's torture, right? As people like Dr. Gracian would say that. And whether that's true or not, as you said, I thought one of the interesting things y'all talked about is this notion of false memories and how, being in solitary can make you say all sorts of things. But the things that he is saying, he's not just screaming, I did it. He's giving these detailed stories of what happened, how the day went, where he was, that lines up with what he actually did that day. And then includes details like this white van driving by, which I don't care how much you look at Reddit. Was a white van mentioned in this case? Of course it was. A white van is mentioned in every case. But what was not mentioned was the idea that someone on the access road owned a white van and drove by at that time. I mean, that is a detail that I don't care, unless he became so crazy that he attained the power
Clairvoyant.
of reading minds. Yeah, clairvoyant, exactly. Or a time traveler. He would not know that detail. And to me, all of this talk, it just, as Alice said, it falls apart. It's just about how he's treated and to make you feel sorry for him, which is hard to do when someone's on trial for murdering two people. And I had just one other question about the doctor's testimony, Dr. Westcott, because when I heard you guys describing her testimony and her describing him, what I thought it sounded like was an ineffectual man who has no power over his own life, who is dominated by the women around him, who, with my pop psychology degree, is exactly the kind of person who would go out to a trail to try and find two young girls to dominate and have power over it. Did any discussion of that ever come out?
Well, that was certainly the discussion I was having in my own mind with myself, I guess, because that's exactly what I thought. I'm like, this guy sounds like a loser who would absolutely take out his rage at women or life or sexual frustrations on people who can't fight back. It did not do anything for me to make me think this guy would never do anything. They didn't go into like what a gentle person he was, or the care he took in relations with others, or how kind he was, or how compassionate, or how he would do things for other people when they were in need, or how he championed women or his daughter or his wife in any way. It was just basically like, the wife and mommy run my life, and I have a history of kind of falling apart on some level when a immense stress is placed upon me, and maybe what's immensely stressful for him is not the same as what it's immensely stressful for anyone else. So to me, it kind of just sounded like a ticking time bomb of a person potentially. What did you think, Kevin?
Yeah, I would agree with everything Ian just said, and it wasn't lost on me that by his own account, on the morning of the murders, he is with his sister and his mother, two people, obviously females, who he may feel dominated by, who may have ignited some anger or stress in his life.
And then his story, now the defense contests this in fairness, but his story is that he gets a 6-pack, drinks 3 beers, drinks the rest later. And so, like, all of that plus alcohol. I mean, I think anyone who's had a drinking problem, or maybe even just had a crazy night, can tell you, you do things when you're drinking that maybe, like, or your inhibitions go away. And maybe stuff you would not normally do, you act out on. And it just seemed to me like that fit with what Westcott was saying in a way.
Most of you listening right now are probably multitasking. Yep, while you're listening to us talk, you're probably also driving, cleaning, exercising, or maybe even grocery shopping. But if you're not in some kind of moving vehicle, there's something else you can be doing right now. Getting an auto quote from Progressive Insurance. It's easy, and you could save money by doing it right from your phone. Drivers who save by switching to Progressive save nearly $750 on average, and auto customers qualify for an average of 7 discounts. Discounts for having multiple vehicles on your policy, being a homeowner, and more.
So just like your favorite podcast, Progressive will be with you 24/7 365 days a year, so you're protected no matter what. Multitask right now. Quote your car insurance at Progressive.com to join the over 28 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $744 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2022 and May 2023. Potential savings will vary. Discounts not available in all states and situations.
Yeah, and it did strike me. Look, everyone has different habits. Maybe he does this every time he sees his mom, is to go grab a six-pack. But you tend to do that when you're like stressed out. And it was like around lunchtime. So I'm not going to say it was morning drinking, but it wasn't like I've had a long day. I'm going to go grab a six-pack and relax in front of the game at 6 p.m. It's a very different thing to go grab a six-pack after seeing your mom and turning her down for what, lunch, brunch, whatever it is, something in the early part of the day, right? And to go drink 3 beers by yourself. Again, I don't know what his normal actions are, but those could be the result of a stressful morning, right? And when we have stress for whatever reason, and we haven't talked about how one of his confessions, and obviously the defense called the daughter and sister, and they said that he never molested them, but in his confessions he said, I molested a number of people, including Libby and Abby. Is when we're pushed to the extreme, especially people who have fantasized about certain crimes, the line between reality and imagination become very blurred. So it is possible that you have these, Brett's joked about on other episodes before that all of us have thought about murdering someone. We have. If you haven't, or you say you haven't thought about murdering someone, that's not true. But in extreme circumstances, your mind begins to blur what actually is reality and what's not. I always have doomsday scenarios in my head where I like get in a terrible car accident and I watch my own death, stuff like that, And so like sometimes I'm like, what is reality? And you can imagine that whether he actually did molest other people or not, or the people he said he did or not, that is not an outburst out of being in solitary confinement. That came from somewhere deep within him. This is something that he's thought about before. So whether he's actually acted upon it in the physical world or not is not that important to me. It's his own outburst of his deepest, darkest confessions to himself. That's what he thinks about in his darkest times.
Yeah, and I had a question about that actually. His sister, was the sister that testified the sister that he saw that day?
I believe so. I believe, now Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe he has one sister. She's a half sister, so they share the same mother, Janice, but have different fathers.
And did they confirm that he did see them that morning, or did they even get into that?
They did not get into that. Jennifer Auger conducted that direct examination, and she kept it very, very contained, very much, who are you? Were you molested? Do you love your brother / or in the daughter's case, father? And would you lie for him? Like, that was pretty much it. So it gave the prosecution less to work with on the cross.
Gotcha. I guess they could have recalled them in rebuttal, but they didn't do that. But no, I think Alice is right. You want to talk about false memories? Maybe he does have false memories, but maybe they're the other things he said. Whereas Alice said, if he did this, he has fantasized about this. I have no doubt about that in my mind. And, that could be the kind of thing that he creates in his own head when he's now confessing. He may have molested them 1,000 times in his mind and in his fantasies. We'll never know unless he's willing to one day talk about what happened. I want to talk about, there were other people who testified, just quickly for those of you who are following this. Shelby Hicks and Daniel Pearson, unclear why we care about those people. They saw the dude with the camera who also testified. Another person. These are all people who saw nothing, know nothing, and would not have even been there under either theory. So there you go. And if you guys have an explanation for why these people are called, feel free to give it, but I have a feeling you don't.
I mean, I guess maybe to give the Reddit crowd a thrill of like, wow, we're finally hearing from Shelby Hicks. I mean, like, that's a big deal if you really cared about this stuff on, in 2019 on certain subreddits. I don't know otherwise how this helped at all. And I mean, poor Daniel Pearson, he didn't testify, but he was brought up a lot. And like, this is a guy who was kind of like, degraded by people as maybe he's the killer. So it's just, I mean, It was really bizarre to hear some of that come full circle, but it didn't serve any informational purpose.
Another person who's been accused by the Reddit crowd, Brad Weber, testified he is the driver of the white van. Remember, the defense during cross wanted to talk more about his prior interviews, so they called him back during their case to do that. Sounds like if they were trying to undermine him, it didn't really work. He, talked to some FBI agents at some point, may or may not have not remembered exactly how his day went at that point, but
And
doesn't seem like there was a gotcha there.
I thought what was crucial was before he talked to the FBI agents, he talked to other law enforcement. And the people he talked to closest to the actual event have him saying he went straight home.
Yeah, and I will say this with the FBI, for folks who might not know, traditionally over the history, I mean, I think this is a 302 form. I don't think they typically record their interviews. So all we have is basically, so I'm like, I don't know if this is a situation where he said the wrong thing, or it could be like, what do you normally do when you leave and some wires get crossed? Because one thing that was crucial was that Christopher Guti, who was at that interview, I think he indicated that he thought he said he just went home, but then he was, Jennifer Auger sort of pushed him, or this is what this document says, and he kind of was just like, I don't know, so it's just, we didn't kind of get anywhere on that impeachment, I felt. But Weber seemed very hostile to the defense at first, but ultimately when he was brought back and recalled, he was much more calm. He seemed pretty credible to me about talking about this and just sort of insisting that I went home that day. I know I was driving a white van, and that's kind of it.
Yeah, and the FBI doesn't record their interviews. No.
Oh
my God.
This is an auspicious day.
We're just trying to get the jury to come back.
There you go. Alice, we were just talking about
beautiful
Brad Weber.
She's
Hi,
beautiful.
Brittany.
Sorry, guys. She's had a lot of mommy angst this week. So
she's so cute.
So the most important witness, I thought, to the defense's case was Eric Warren. And Eric Warren is our ballistics guy. Because remember, for those of you who want to do the whole, if there were no confessions, would there be a case? Well, a key part of this case is the bullet that was found with the girl, the cartridge, the unspent round that was tested by an expert, confirmed by another expert to have cycled through Richard Allen's gun. So we knew at some point they were going to call a ballistics expert. One thing I would like to note for those of you out there who are confused by this witness confirms the validity of ballistics. He is not someone they called to talk about how ballistics are worthless. You can't trust them. He is actually just another ballistics expert who is going to say, in his opinion, the bullet didn't go through the gun, or at least the investigation by the state's expert was lacking. Now, it sounds like this guy got pretty blown up on cross-examination for a few reasons. Number one, he didn't look at the cartridge. He did not do any tests of his own. In fact, all he did was look at photographs of the testing, which in prior testimony, he had testified was insufficient and you should not rely on pictures. Did I get that right?
Yeah, you nailed it. I thought Deputy Prosecutor James Luttrell did a pretty devastating cross-examination of this guy. And, he obviously had, he obviously had experience and was able to sort of do some good. Honestly, to my mind, it made me wonder, did the defense try to send the bullet elsewhere and did not get an answer they wanted? So then they just had someone else come in.
Or it's very possible that they know, right? Because they have something that the prosecution doesn't have. They have Richard Allen. And if they're like, Ricky, is this your bullet? And he's like, you don't want to test it. They're not going to want to test it. And so you sometimes just don't test what you don't want an answer to. Because if they get something back, you're going to be in a rock and a hard place. If you don't turn that over, it comes out that you tested it and it confirms. So it's just better not to know. So often, I did a marker. I don't know what that means. So oftentimes it's just better to not do it. Because remember, in his confession, he told you that he lost a bullet at some point. And we have the same caliber, whether that is the cartridge at the scene or not, whether that's from his gun or not, it matches the cartridge in his keepsake box. None of these things are good. The odds of it coming back to something other than Richard Allen's gun, very low. So that's another tactic. Again, I don't think it's wrong. I also don't want to know the answer. Don't ask questions to answers you don't want to know.
Yeah, I think Alice is dead on. And I'm glad you brought this up because it is much easier to do what they did than actually have someone look at it. Because if they have a real expert look at it, most experts, I mean, I'm sure there's some out there you can buy, but most experts are going to tell you what they see. And if this guy, which I think he actually said in cross-examination, that if he had looked at it, he might have said, yeah, same one. That could have happened. Mm-hmm. So they intentionally did that. They made a decision not to test it. And that should send a message to everybody out there.
And this is, again, these are great tactics. I'm not demeaning these tactics, but you need to know what tactics are. Notice all of the crying about isolation and how terrible his mental health was. They never asked for a mental competency hearing on him. They never asked for psychological treatment. That treatment came from the jail. It came from the state side. It didn't come because did you see a GoFundMe? Did you see a GoFundMe by the defense for Richard Allen's mental health care? No. And there is a reason for that as well, right? And so part of the thing is to yell, but notice when they yell and when they actually take action. So when you yell about a bullet, but don't actually try to confirm whether it's not the bullet, that says something. When you say, oh, the height's all off, but then don't do your own analysis and show that the height matters, then that doesn't matter. When you say solitary confinement is causing all these problems, but don't take any actions to actually save your guy, that says something. So just because you yell about something doesn't mean you actually believe it.
Yeah, that's so well said.
And I think, can we just all agree that Stacey Eldridge and the headphone jack is the dumbest thing? I mean, of all the dumb things that have come out in this case, this idea
under Abby.
It was under Abby. It was in the water, Abby. In the dirt. Like there's all sorts of reasons that your phone, as you all know, anybody who's ever had a phone, your phone can register various things happening. I mean, Alice's phone just fell to the ground when her cute little baby was playing with it. No telling what that phone would register if you looked at it, because
probably jumped off an Empire State Building just now.
Yeah, but here exactly. But here's the thing: who really believes that whoever did this murdered Abby and Libby, and then what? Stuck a pair of headphones in the phone, but didn't play anything on it? Or why would they do that? It's just such a silly thing, and to see people make such a big deal out of it. I mean, I guess one of the things about this case that has been distressing to me is the gullibility of people watching it. Did you get a different sense when you were listening to this phone evidence? Because I got to say, from reading about it and listening to your coverage, it did not seem very convincing to me at all.
Did we get in that day?
We didn't get in that day, but we heard from other people who were in there.
Yeah, we kind of like grabbed a bunch of people afterwards and we're like, what happened? We missed that afternoon session, but I mean, personally, when you have two explanations and one is just something that like everyone has experienced with their phone, and then the other is like some improbable headphone session on the forest floor where what like it doesn't add up in terms of things that make any sense, then that was kind of my takeaway. I think people have been incredibly gullible about this case for a long time. I mean, not everybody, but I think,
including some of the reporters covering it from the mainstream press.
Mainstream press has been incredibly, like, I feel like there's this kind of bizarre double standard that, like, I don't know, it's like we're going to be completely skeptical about everything the state says, but like kind of just eating up anything the defense claims. And that's despite the fact that throughout this pre-trial process, the defense has made some ridiculous claims that have kind of fallen on their face eventually. So I'm kind of like, I want there to be skepticism of everybody, and certainly I think that's appropriate. I just don't feel like we're seeing that happen. It just seems like people want there to be a certain outcome here, and then they kind of are are critical of one side accordingly. And like to me, it's like I really would prefer to look at it and see like I think you guys have actually made me feel better about some of the defense tactics because when you kind of put them that way, I'm like, yeah, that actually makes sense to do that. It maybe I sometimes look at it through too much of a like some. I want to know what happened to these girls. You know what I mean? So it can be harder for me because I'm like, well, that's not logical. That's a dumb thing to say. Why would they say that? But they're trying to protect their client, and that that might mean saying some things that don't really add up from a case perspective, but they're still valid.
And
Um,
I think people who are listening to the trial, I'm not saying the jurors, but like the rest of the world who's listening, get caught up in semantics because we use the term experts in court all the time. But there is a difference between like a ballistics expert and a DNA expert and like an iPhone jack expert. A lot of us have phones that have like plugs. Most of us do, whether it's an iPhone or another type of phone. So we've said this before. Like when you walk in the courtroom doors, there's nothing some special about the judicial system where you have to like put all of your life experiences at the door. That's actually the opposite of what the founding fathers had in mind when they created our judicial system. They wanted us to actually use our lived experiences and not check common sense at the door when we walk in. And so while I recognize I don't know how to look at DNA and like match the profiles, or I don't know how to do ballistic like markings myself, that's not my expertise. But I have a phone. I understand how phone tracking works just from my lived experience. And I feel like when people are listening to quote unquote experts, they put them all in the same bucket, but you don't have to do that. And if, by the way, you yourself have experience with ballistics or with shooting guns and know how recoil works, you get to take that into the courtroom. It's not like you have to check all of your own knowledge at the door. That's why it's supposed to be a jury of your peers, because one person may not have all the experience, but among 12 people, the idea is there's like an average of what the regular person knows and what's common sense, right? We don't have to explain at the very core, like you don't have to just go in with a blank slate and we tell you this is what it means to have a fingerprint. None of that, right? We get to start with some sort of shared lived experiences. And I think some of the semantics of trial and legalese get people in like a tizzy when they listen to trials.
yeah, and I feel like people don't like to feel like I don't know. I feel like there's a certain with true crime where I've seen, like the CSI effect, like there has to be DNA on everything, or I don't feel comfortable making a decision regardless of what other evidence there is. Like there's an element I feel like, or some people don't really, they want to be convinced that they're not making a mistake. They almost don't like there's almost like I feel like a bit of self-doubt with that. Like almost like make me feel 100% certain or I can't make a decision. And I just don't it that kind of ends up throwing a lot of common sense out the door. It's the classic example of like, if your driveway is wet when you go outside in the morning, like did a big fire truck driven by a penguin hose down your house or something, or did it rain? I mean, like, I feel like people want to say, well, I want to see the footage because otherwise, I might make a mistake and miss out on the penguin thing. And it's like, I don't know, it's just kind of disheartening sometimes, I guess.
Yeah, in this case, this has really brought that out. I mean, people, and we try and explain reasonable doubt all the time. People do not understand reasonable doubt. They think it's beyond any doubt. Somebody on Twitter was like, well, it could have been Weber. So since it could be him, that's reasonable doubt. Like, number one, unless the man can travel faster than the speed of light, it could not have been him. But number two, this sort of like amorphous, well, it could have been him. It could have been a cult. Therefore, there's reasonable doubt. I mean, that's not the standard at all. I mean, reasonable doubt is a high standard, but it's not this perfect knowledge thing that people think it is. It's very, I mean, in some ways, it's very simple, as we say in trial, and as I'm sure was told to the jury. It's the amount of confidence you would need to make an important decision in your life. And you often make important decisions with sort of lingering sort of questions in the back of your mind, but you feel sure enough to say, yes, this is the thing to do. It's the same thing here. I don't really know how you get to reasonable doubt in this case. I mean, the jury has been deliberating for a while, so maybe they will get there or they'll get to something. I guess we're going to see. But yeah, I mean, reasonable doubt is just it is a difficult concept for people to wrap their heads around. And you've really seen that here. And unfortunately, true crime is in a lot of ways just a scourge. I say this as someone in the true crime field. There are so many people out there who are dedicated to misleading the masses. and and
Yes.
and it just it drives me kind of crazy, to be honest with you.
I'm so glad you said that. And can I just say this? If Brad Weber did this, then he either needed to have like those ATM machines that he was working on. They had to be like some sort of Star Trek transportation portal that he was secretly accessing, or that he's, like so many people in Carroll County, according to the internet, he must be the kingpin of some massive Odinist cult slash meth ring where all of law enforcement is willing to lie for him. Because one of the first things McClelland asked in this trial of one of the officers who was out there looking for Libby and Abby, when you knocked on Brad Weber's door, was he covered in blood? Was he sweaty? Was he out of breath? No, he just looked normal. So like I like all of this stuff he could have. It's like these people don't even watch the trial. They have no idea what's going on. They have no idea what's even being discussed. But like, oh, the vibes sound right. So yeah, true crime is a scourge. I think it also attracts a lot of people who are more interested in a good story than living in a factual reality.
And I'll say this, as you know, gotta bring the Pollyanna whenever we can, because obviously we're not the scourge on this call. I think it's that right now it's completely unregulated, and with whatever you want to call it, the disintegration of institutions, of understanding what truth is, or even thinking that truth is attainable. By the way, I think truth is absolutely attainable, and it's truth whether you identify it as truth or not. We're in that kind of space that I think we are moving through. I'm hopeful because cases like this one are opening a lot of people's eyes to the absurdity of such a world where truth doesn't exist or truth is relative, that we are going to move past it eventually. And right now, true crime is so unregulated because people do just like conspiracy theories. Look, go watch Harry Potter. I love Harry Potter too, but that's not real life. And I get my fun from Harry Potter for that fun. I don't get fun from the murders of young girls as my entertainment. And so once we as we've said this with you guys a bunch of times, once we as the consumers start to regulate those bad actors, I do think it will become a better space because it is a few who make it very bad for the rest of us.
So just briefly, there was a rebuttal in this case. The prosecution brought a few people back. I'll see if I get them all. One of them was Brianne Wilbur, who saw Bridge Guy that day. She was there. She was taking pictures of the Freedom Bridge. She was wandering around the park. She saw no one else resembling Bridge Guy. So if there were two people dressed just like him, one of whom is Richard Allen by his own admission, she didn't see another person who fit that description. And in fact, as we've said many times, that would have been a little unusual because one of the reasons people that stuck in their mind was he was so overdressed. The person who was there, who is Bridge Guy, was so overdressed for the weather that it stuck with people. There was nobody else like that. So if Bridge Guy did this, which he did, that's another. Can y'all talk about this briefly? Y'all have seen the video, the full video. These people out there who now have moved on to Bridge Guy's irrelevant. And, who cares if Richard Allen's Bridge Guy because he didn't do it. Can you explain just how absurd that is? Can you lay that out for people?
Oh my gosh.
Do you want to do it?
Well, I've been yapping constantly. You go ahead.
The video clearly depicts this Bridge Guy behind Abby, and it depicts him getting closer and closer to her on the bridge. We get a
Can I ask a clarifying question there?
Yes.
In the video, and maybe you can't see it, but I assume in the very short amount of the video, wherever he is in that video, he comes upon them within that video time, right? Because it looks far in the video, but if he's walking upon them within seconds, he's clearly not that far away. Is that right?
What would you say?
I guess I'm terrible with judging distances, but it's almost like you see Abby on the bridge. She looks scared to me, and you see a guy behind her. And then the video, I think at some point, like Libby kind of tips the camera down, so you're not really seeing that anymore. But I mean, he's like like what I would say. My interpretation is that it doesn't look like a guy far in the distance, casually strolling while they happen to be doing something up front. it looks like they're being hunted. I mean, it looks like someone
It
is.
looks like someone's getting closer and closer to her.
And they sound terrified. They sound absolutely terrified. That is what is so heartbreaking about this. Is like this guy hunted them like they were prey. I mean, it's not subtle.
Libby says something about a gun. Abby says something about being freaked out, and then you hear the guys. They say something like
Hi.
and then you hear this metallic noise that sounded to me like the racking of a gun, and he says down the hill.
It's one of those things, like, I've used this example. I'm sure like everyone, man and woman, have probably experienced this, but if you're, especially women, if you're ever around like a kind of a creepy guy, or you're almost like trying not to interact or not to have any sort of interaction, but you might kind of like, your voice might get higher, you sound a bit like, oh hey, what's over there, like da-da-da, like pretending like this isn't happening, hope it blows over. That's what they sound like to me. They're almost hoping like he's walking weird, he's gonna walk past us, and then we'll go run back across the bridge essentially.
And keep in mind, none of the other witnesses saw any other person at that time. All we know is there's this one male adult there, and he comes across them and takes them. And there's no sign that there was anyone else there. The defense tried to suggest perhaps there was someone off to the side, and Bridge Guy just walked off, and it was this other mystery person who did it.
So that, in that case, Bridge Guy must be the world's most oblivious person if he basically walked by a pack of Odinists ready to do a sacrifice. And, I didn't notice anything, and also I didn't notice the girls. I mean, the story doesn't add up. I think the fact that the defense attorneys and frankly their online acolytes have gravitated from defending Richard Allen to frankly defending Bridge Guy should be telling to everybody who's paying attention. And I think personally, this is my own opinion, you cannot bait, this is not evidence, you cannot base condemning a man over this, because there are too few words spoken. Guys down the hill is not enough to really do any sort of meaningful analysis with his voice, but he sounds exactly like Bridge Guy. Like he sounds, I mean, like when he says Ricky on his prison phone calls, it's like, I just am like, oh my God, like it, I just don't, yeah.
But
it is what it is.
Yeah, no one else there. It had to be him.
Yeah, I don't.
So briefly, let's talk about Dr. John Martin. I'm trying to get Alice back to. Alice needs to. I tried to tell Alice, we all know you're Superwoman, but you don't have to come on today.
Superwoman. It's so cute. Oh.
So Martin testifies. He's one of the psychologists, I guess the head psychologist maybe, who interacted with Alan, helped set his medication, talked to him, et cetera, et cetera. And Kevin and Anya, I know you guys, y'all know so much about history. I love listening to your podcast, and all of a sudden you're just throwing something out there, some historical tidbit. So I want to ask you some questions for my edification, because I admit I don't know the answer to these questions. So if you could help me out. In prisoner of war camps, were you able to watch television?
I mean, maybe in Hogan's Heroes. I don't know.
No.
Were you able to make phone calls to loved ones?
No.
Did you have a tablet connected to the internet?
No.
Did you have a buddy?
Did you have a buddy you could talk to?
No.
Do you have rec time?
No.
You could go like work out. So none of these things. I'm shocked by this, because I keep hearing
commissary where people put money into it.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyone can put money into it, in fact.
I keep hearing that he was treated like he was a POW, and I'm trying to figure out the basis for that statement.
As a person with family members who were sent to labor camps in a communist country, I find that highly offensive, and I find it highly inaccurate as well. But I'd like to hear a historical view, not just my anecdotal view.
Yeah. I've heard from a lot of people who have POWs, former people, POWs in their families, who also find it very highly offensive comparison, given the fact that a lot of the issues that he seemed to have around things like his tablet were self-imposed by him having a fit and breaking his tablet. That's not exactly a apples to apples situation that you would encounter in a POW camp.
So once the state finished its rebuttal, and if there's anything you feel like is important to highlight, we can do that as well.
There's one more rebuttal witness I'd actually like to get your opinions on. And this was Brian Harshman, and this is the gentleman who introduced all of the phone calls and confessions. And earlier in the case, of course, the defense has tried to make the claim that basically when Richard Allen was sent to Westville, he was treated so badly, he had a mental breakdown, started making what they term as false confessions. Then he's transferred out of the Indiana Department of Corrections and into Cass County Jail, and he gets all better and everything is fine now. And so Harshman is a rebuttal witness, clearly was there because he wanted to introduce a video of Richard Allen at Cass County where he is threatening to kill guards and doing other things of a disturbing nature. And the judge refused to allow that to be admitted. So I'm curious, why do you think the judge ruled that way? Do you agree with it?
Well, she would have ruled that way because she said it was more prejudicial,
Yeah.
unfairly prejudicial than probative. But I think she's completely wrong. I think if you're going to let the defense play just hours of videos of him, quote unquote, bad things happening to him, him being treated like a POW or whatever, that absolutely should have come in. Now, I can't get into her head. I will say sometimes as the case goes on, judges will get more and more restrictive on the state and on the prosecution just because in their mind, they're thinking they have proven their case. I'm appeal proofing this at this point. Could I let this in? Yeah. Is it going to be an issue on appeal? It's an argument they can make. So I'm just going to keep it out. You don't need it. I mean, judges do that. So I don't know if that was part of it, but it's absolutely, in my mind, relevant and admissible under the rules of evidence.
That's a great point. Sometimes the judges do kind of tip their hand when they're like, well, I feel like the evidence is so weighted in one angle. And remember, I mean, again, we can't get in her head, but this case has just been a circus on like outside of court already. She's already been up to the Supreme Court, been mandated to put these attorneys back on. There's definitely, playing it safe. I think it's absolutely relevant, but you can see the argument that would be on appeal. It's more prejudicial and it doesn't go to like the actual murder case. I don't think the prosecution needs it. And I think her not letting it in was being extra cautious. And also, I think she thinks the weight of the evidence is on the prosecution side. Still, you never know. You never know what resonates with jurors, especially if that's their main angle is how badly Richard Allen was treated in jail.
Right. And I think the fact that we're on day 3, right, of jury deliberation may indicate that maybe this is purely speculation, but if some of them, if it became, well, maybe he's the real victim in this case, then that might be something that the prosecution looks back on as kind of something that might have tipped this into mistrial territory.
And talking about something that's going to drive the Richard Allen stands crazy. If this case hangs and they retry it, the judge may reconsider her ruling and let it in the second time, particularly if that was what she was thinking and then it hangs. So just get ready for that blow up if that happens in a second trial. But we're not there yet, and I do want to talk about closings, and you heard them from both sides. I think they're in large part probably what people would expect. The prosecution went through the evidence, laid out the case, laid out the timeline, and the defense seems like kind of wandered around. It was very disjointed based on what I was reading, sort of jumped around, hit a bunch of different points, which, I'm sure there was a method to that madness. What were your thoughts as people who were in there hearing it? What were your thoughts on both the state and the defense close?
I want to start with the defense because it was funny. I think when Kevin and I listened to most of Rosie's closing argument, we were like, yeah, that was pretty well delivered. And then when we saw our notes, we were like, this was all over the place. Like, what? Why were we at all impressed with this? So it was kind of odd. I think he did a good job delivering it, at least, until he got to the ridiculous ending, which was just we can go back to this, but just one of the stupidest things. I felt embarrassed. I mean, it was funny. A reporter next to me was like, "That was really deep," and I was just like, "Okay, yeah." I mean, I guess some people are impressed with this sort of thing, but I was not. I thought McClellan.
You want to discuss what he said?
Why don't you talk about McClellan and then we can come back to the big snake?
That sounds like a nickname. I don't know.
Whatever. Don't even say anything.
Yeah. McClelland's was very fact-based. It was very narrowly focused on what happened on February 13th, 2017. And he went through and he pulled the pieces of all the various testimonies and stuff that had been offered by the state to make it into a coherent story. Because, of course, when witnesses come and testify, it may not always be clear to a jury how all those pieces fit together to form a coherent whole. And that's what he did in my mind. I thought he did a very good job.
Yeah, and so for Big Snake, uh, for his final, it felt like very like eighth grader essay kind of type thing, like trying to make a big point, but like just kind of going over the top. Um, Rosie threw up some pictures of a bearded man screaming while being tortured with thumb screws, and like a picture of a medieval torture rack in a dungeon, and then also a snake eating a guy to show that the snake equals the government. And it was just dumb.
And it was basically jury nullification, as you mentioned earlier, because he said if you vote guilty, you're basically endorsing all of that. And haven't we moved beyond such things?
And I will say this: you hear this. A big snake is a little more extreme than what you typically see, but this is one of those. He's probably done it before. Standard defense tactics, which is present the government as this big, evil, awful authoritarian, and try and get the jury to sort of stand up for freedom, America, and the Constitution by acquitting, regardless of what the facts are. Alice and I had a trial once where, we were friendly with the defense attorneys the whole time, joking back and forth with them. When they did their closing, we were Nazis. I mean, they just went. It was wild how far they went and how terrible we were. And then, of course, as soon as the trial's over, they're all buddy again. I will say this: Alice, I don't think, even spoke to them after that point.
They literally like pointed to me and was like, "The man," and when did I become a man?
Yeah, it was something. So I think probably what Rosie would tell you, I've actually heard a defense attorney say this about another ridiculous strategy, is when it stops working, I'll stop doing it. So he's probably done it before. And I think that's an important thing to remember about the entire defense case. We have talked a lot about why are they doing this? Why are they focusing on these things? They have a focus group out there in a real way. I mean, they have, through their surrogates in the media, been able to present a lot of these ideas and these thoughts to the public, and people have believed it. There are people out there who hear the stuff about taking the girls away, or the Odinist theory, or Big Snake. I mean, whatever, they hear it and they believe it, right? And so I think in their mind, they're thinking, if these people who listen to true crime podcasts can fall for this, there may be somebody on the jury who this will be effective with as well. So I think everything they're doing is calculated, I think, to get a hung jury. I mean, maybe Richard Allen will be acquitted. That's possible. I don't think they expect that. I think they want to get a hung jury, see what happens next. Maybe it hangs 6-6, and maybe it makes the state wonder whether they just not going to be able to do this. I think that everything they're doing is calculated. And to the extent it seems absurd, it only seems absurd to those of us who have not fallen for this stuff. There are people out there who believe all of this. And if they get somebody on the jury who is like that, then they may end up being successful.
Yeah, I think the fact also we're still on deliberations may indicate that they have been successful, at least. I mean, we don't know. I mean, they could just be going through every piece of evidence, but I think it's also possible that they're, it's resonated with some people, either the Big Snake, or Alan is the real victim, or there's a couple of different competing narratives that the jurors can choose from if they find those compelling. But it's definitely, I guess, like, I don't know, I think it's really important for people to understand that defense attorneys have a very important job to do, and they're supposed to be aggressive, and it's supposed to be, kind of no holds barred to a certain extent, because that's our adversarial system relies on that. But that doesn't mean that you have to like throw out all of your common sense and ability to think logically and necessarily say, well, yes, it's more likely that there was this vast Odinist conspiracy or whatnot. It's like we can kind of appreciate what people are doing as part of their jobs and still But, I mean, one thing that's going to help, I think, if there's a mistrial and then he gets retried, they go again, is that the media has essentially, like, kind of, I think, very much run for a number of reasons with the narrative that the prosecution has no case. And so I think it's going to be difficult. Maybe it was going to be hard for the defense the first time because everyone's seen Richard Allen's mugshots, but this time, if there is a next time, it's going to be with this idea that, like, this guy's being railroaded and the state has no case and we're shocked by the lack of DNA. And so it'll be interesting. I think that might harm the state on the second go. What do you think, Kevin?
Yeah, maybe. I'm still hopeful that the jury reaches a verdict.
Well, let's talk about that. So they started deliberating Thursday. Is that right?
Thursday at 1:30ish.
And they spent not long at all. Seems like they really kind of went back there, set everything up, and then
Yeah.
went home, right?
They went home after 2 hours.
And then they had a full day Friday.
Well,
So
Yeah,
didn't they leave early?
just a little bit.
They left an hour early. They went from like 9 to 3:30. Maybe.
and then they came in late on Saturday
Yes.
and stayed until. I mean, the weird thing about this jury, they're being sequestered. I don't know if they really like this hotel or something. They're being
I know.
sequestered, but they're not taking all the time like what you would normally see. And what we see is juries asking to stay longer
Until
saying,
like
hey,
midnight.
yeah.
Especially if there's some sort of like a disagreement among them. They want to like hash it out. They don't want to go home, and you don't want to go home because people fester and people have emotions. Like, people get very invested in these things. So I don't know. I'm not in their heads, but the fact that they seem very relaxed about the schedule almost makes it seem like it's more methodical, rather going through all the evidence as they should. They can read everything that, all the evidence. They can listen to all of the tapes, all the confessions as many times as they want. Sorry, Brittany. But what you typically see is people get so heated if there's disagreements, if there's a holdout, that they can't look at each other. They don't want to eat lunch together. They fight about everything, and they want to stay and like fight to the death until midnight, until the judge basically is like, everyone go take a rest. So the fact that they're actually ending early makes me wonder if they're just being very methodical, very careful about making sure they go through all the evidence rather than trying to talk someone out of a position.
And there's also been no notes, right? Like, they haven't sent any notes asking questions of the judge. There's no indication they're hung.
Yeah, not that we're aware of any notes.
If there was a note, you should be aware of it, because that's the kind of thing that
you would think.
Read it in open court.
You would think so, but this judge with her public access record,
okay.
I don't feel comfortable saying definitely not. But certainly in a normal case, you would have heard that.
I will say there are signs when there's like a lot of disagreement among the jury. Like, Brett and I had a case where we were getting real sweaty about, whether we were going to win, because there were questions like that were off base. And it was questions where the questions were formulated clearly aimed at the holdout or holdouts, right?
Yeah.
They're questions like, can you trust someone who is under duress? Like, they're framed in a way where it's like, explain to me again what reasonable doubt is. It's not that they don't understand, but it's like geared towards someone that's a holdout, and they're like banging their heads. There just are signs, and my understanding is it's been quiet, unlike my room, right?
That's our understanding too, and it may be worth noting most of the deliberation time yesterday was spent watching videos. The videos of the 2 interrogations, and also the enhanced version of the video Libby took on the bridge.
I think tomorrow, which is Monday, those listening, and they will be deliberating tomorrow, even though it's Veterans Day, correct?
Yes.
I think we will either get an indication they are hung, or we'll get a verdict. I just can't imagine we're going to have another day of silence from the jury where they deliberate all day and just go back to the hotel. I mean, they could surprise me. I've been surprised before, but I would just be surprised if there's not some indication either of turmoil with the jury or that they're close to a verdict. I don't know.
Yeah, it's been really driving us crazy, I think, or at least me crazy, because I have no patience to kind of be trying to read the tea leaves. And every day it's like, the jury wants to come in at 10 a.m. Like, jury, like what? Because I'm the kind of person too, like, I want to get stuff over with. So I feel like I would be like okay, everyone, we're working until midnight. We're going to get this done because I want to go home to my family. I've already missed the election day. I've missed Halloween. I've missed, all this
There's
stuff.
a juror who missed one of her kids' 3rd birthdays.
Yeah, I mean,
because of this.
Their parents, their grandparents, they have jobs, they have lives. So it's been surprising to me on some level because I almost kind of pegged them for a jury that was going to try to like kind of get to a place early on, or at least maybe signal that they were deadlocked early on if they were deadlocked. And so the fact that it's been kind of almost like a bit lackadaisical is like just totally not what I expected, but it's hard to read.
And there is a thing about the number of days, like if they're all short days, because like Thursday's a half day, Friday was a kind of a shorter day, Saturday's a short day. You can say, if I'm putting someone away for the rest of their life, I thought about it for 4 days. Like there could be that kind of look. We're already stuck here. Might as well just give all the due deliberation and show that we took it seriously, because we did take it seriously. We could tell by all the jury questions.
Yeah, I think they were very, not everybody asked questions, but those who did were very engaged, very much on point. I felt like I was pretty impressed, and I think it's very possible that they're just trying to give this as much. I mean, a man's life is on the line. This is incredibly serious. Two children were murdered. It's just, I can understand if they want to just be really careful about it. I mean, that's, I think, what everyone would want and expect for a case like this.
And I'll tell you whose job sucks the most: the alternates who are sitting in the room. Which this is another Indiana thing. I mean, I'm sure other states do this too, but they're sitting in the room, but they cannot talk. They can't actually deliberate, but they're with the jury while they're deciding. So they're just sitting there in a corner, I guess. Well, all this is being discussed over these days, just probably thinking, will you idiots go ahead and get this done so I can go home? Like, it just, being an alternate in that circumstance must be terrible.
I completely agree. And that's so odd. I'm from New York originally, so some of these Indiana specific rules, it's not like I knew a lot about New York law, but that seems so mean to the alternates, like that they just have to sit there and watch. It's like, geez.
That is a special form of torture. But the reason they have to do it is they have to be completely caught up in case someone like has a medical emergency and has to bow out, and they don't have to restart deliberations. But man, that is hard as a human element to sit through.
Oh my
And there are
God.
some states where they do exactly that. They have to restart. And that happened, I think, in the Scott Peterson case. A juror got kicked off, and they had been deliberating for days, and they had to get the new juror, and they had to start over. So that rule is intended to avoid that. So I guess we'll see. Well, look, guys, thank you so much for joining us. Y'all have been amazing. If there's anybody out there who's not listening to the Murder Sheet, I don't know what's wrong with you. And I'll just say, if you guys have one fan, it's me. If you have no fans, I'm dead. Because y'all are awesome. And I will always appreciate the work that you did and the dedication. And I really hope you don't have to do this again, because I don't know that your sanity will survive. You'll be eating paper before the end of it.
Why do you think we have the camera off?
No, thank you guys. Thank you for your reporting and for taking time for us. You absolutely could be sleeping or doing anything but being here. So thank you.
We love talking to you guys. It's always a real pleasure and helps us unpack things. And we get so much out of it. And we love your programs. Thank you for having us. Your praise means a lot.
And you guys have done amazing coverage of this case. And I feel like, in a world where I think people are kind of just lying about it at this point, like, I think that means a lot that you guys are adding that sense of sanity to the discussion and coming from the legal basis that you are, because it's very, very necessary.
Well, Alice, thank you as well for joining us. I don't know, Alice, do you want to do the sign off since you're here?
Sure. There might be a Brittany in the background, but why not,
fine.
right?
Best part.
All right. Let's see if she'll be quiet. She will not. Well, Kevin, Anya, nope.
She just wants to be part of the sign off.
She does want to be. All right. Well, until next time, I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
I'm Anya.
I'm Kevin.
And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs.
There's a place there that has amazing biscuits. So I've been
Oh.
eating a lot of biscuits.
Yeah, it was like we weren't eating enough during the trial, but now we're eating a lot of food, so it's nuts. But you know, people in the town are super nice.
And if there's a verdict, do you guys just have to run to a line and get in a line? Is that how that works?
There's a whole political line thing, diplomacy. I guess we may be in line now. I don't even know.